Welcome to everybody. I'm glad to be here, and I'd certainly like to thank Michelle for offering the opportunity for me to be here. I am, and probably have spent most of my life looking for like-minded people who would be able to continue or honor their own personal growth and to be willing to explore and question why we're here, what it all means, all those questions. And I've always worked with people my whole life, trying to invite them to make informed decisions. And part of the informed decision process is to be able to have an open mind. And it's amazing to me, and I'm sure we're all like this, that we will ask somebody a question and we'll get an answer that, if it's contrary to what we believe, our first impulse is to say, no, that's not right. I'm not going to listen to that because it's information that doesn't fit in what I have as my frame of reference. So part of what I try and do is invite people to have an openness. And part of the interesting thing about the song, when we are able to find our place, or find ourselves in a place of peace, we do that not by creating the peace, but by removing the obstacles that we have created in our own ego minds to be able to exist as we think, because our egos make us do that in this planet, and actually create a separation from who we really are. And then we focus on the problems that all of that creates. So we look at things like judgment. So we have judgment about ourselves. And we start that right from our first breath. The judgment comes, and everybody questions. In the end, the curriculum that we all are required to learn is the same for all of us. So when I try and have people understand what that curriculum is, most of the people say, well, why do we have these problems? And, yeah, but, kind of, I call it the Abbott syndrome. Remember Abbott Costello? Yeah, but. And that creates a lot of problems because we focus on the obstacle that we create through our judgment and our fear, and then try to manage that, and that takes us out of our place of peace. When I tell people about what peace is, I say, I think that we all have experienced it from time to time. The thing that's unusual, because my big question, I changed how I practice with people about 15 years ago. I found that with all the education and all the work that I'd done, people really weren't healing the way I would like them to. They weren't really getting it. And my work was really more on kind of a two-dimensional level. So my job and my training is you would present me with some issues or some concerns, some problems, and I would help you identify what those were, and in some way kind of colluding with your belief that, number one, they exist, and most importantly, number two, that you're a victim. That you did not participate in any way in developing these obstacles or contributing to them in some way, without allowing yourself the opportunity to see that there are options that you could look at that will help you bring you back to your place of peace, not create the peace. So the job is really to identify the obstacles. Now, why people have difficulty with that is they will look at what they think is wrong with them, or wrong with their wife, or wrong with their husband, or wrong with their job, or whatever is wrong in your life. And you want solutions to that. You want to have, the 10-step, the 12-step, the 15-step, the 20-step program that you can follow and be able to say, well, I've done all these things. But what I found was that when I was providing that to people, it colluded with their underlying belief and fear and judgment, and it never worked. So, and I've said to my wife, Patty, sometimes, who's a designer, she'll go to somebody's house, and they'll be inviting her, seemingly, to say, well, what can I do with my house? I'd like to change it. I don't know what to do. More often than not, they already have in their minds what they want. So the hardest part of her job, my job, all our jobs, is to be able to understand that why that exists in the first place. Why is it that we create these kinds of obstacles in our minds that stop us from being peaceful? When we're peaceful, what we've done is suspend our ego. So the example that I use, a couple examples can be, for those of you who have children, It doesn't matter what your children look like. It doesn't matter how smart they are. It doesn't matter how not smart they are. It doesn't matter if they're athletic. It doesn't matter if they're male or female. It doesn't matter, if they like school, if they don't like school. If they get a job, they don't get a job. What does matter is that you care about them. You have an attachment to them that is a better example of what I consider to be a spiritual love. Because your judgment is suspended, regardless of who they are, what they do. And I've worked with parents of serial killers. They will still love their children, and we all question that. But we would all be the same. When Pope John Paul was assassination attempt, he went to visit the person who tried to shoot him and forgave him. And everybody was appalled at the time. How could they do that? How could he do that? Because he had a loving spirit. He wanted to forgive him because he knew that it was circumstances. It wasn't about who he was. Often when we read about Jesus, when Jesus healed people, what he did first, always, was to say, are you prepared? Are you ready? Are you open? Are you willing to hear something that is different than what you might have in your head? And largely, for the most part, what he did was remind us of who we are. Not about, this thumb being wrong, or this head being wrong, or being too tall or too short, or whatever it is that we put in our heads that creates the obstacles. And then he would remind us, who are we? We are all connected. We are children of God. And because of that, we're all connected. And to me, that is really the only undeniable truth, and the only one that really makes sense. It allows us to start with a position where we're all equal. So if that is all equal, then all the problems that we create in our lives must also be equal. Or there isn't any problems. So you think of the problems that we have. And I think, why do we need those problems? What is it about us that has this underlying need to create a problem? You can think of it as self-sabotage. Again, I asked you to sort of keep an open mind. Nobody wants to believe that we would do this to ourselves. We wake up in the morning, sort of metaphorically shoot ourselves in the foot, and then walk around during the day and pretend that it doesn't hurt. If it does start to hurt a little bit, first thing we do is point. Right? We victimize ourselves by saying, well, it's because, and then we point. And what we're pointing at is a sensitivity that's created that is an obstacle. And then we need to do something about that. So I'll tell you a little story, a little children's book. You have to picture this little baby female hippopotamus. This little baby female hippopotamus has a tutu and ballet slippers. Okay, can you get that in your head? Little pink tutu. So she wants to learn about life. So her mother says, well, you climb up there and you walk across, and there's a tightrope. So she climbs up because she's very eager and ready to go in her life and very innocent, and starts off on her journey. Of course, the first thing that happens is that her mother takes her off the bottle, or breastfeeding. And that causes a disturbance in her mind. She doesn't know what to do with that, so she loses her balance. She maintains her balance, keeps going. And as she goes through her stages of her growth, kindergarten, she's like all of us, she goes through all the same things. Friends come up, friends hurt her, teachers don't give her a good mark. She gets a boyfriend when she's a teenager and he dumps her and she's very upset. All these things cause her to lose her balance. Occasionally, when it's very disruptive, and I don't deny that there are disruptive things that happen in our lives. Let's say it's a parent that dies, or they've had to relocate, or something more disastrous happens. She falls off. So she's walking along this little tightrope. She doesn't know what to do. She's on the ground. She looks back up the tightrope, scurries back to the ladder, up the rope, back to where she was, and off she goes again. Now, we all know the things that everyone goes through in our lives. She goes through her life and gets to the end of the platform, turns around and looks back at her life. And most of us think the goal of our lives is to look back and say, well, didn't I do a good job with what I was given? Or didn't I manage all these obstacles in my life as well as I could? All that does is seemingly collude with each other's belief that that's the job that we have, is to help each other manage these obstacles. When the real moral is, what is she doing on the tightrope? That's the self-sabotaging part. Shooting yourselves in the foot. And it can be very compelling. In fact, it seems almost obsessive that we live our lives in this way. So we have this compulsion, develop an obstacle, create it in our reality, because if it's something we fear, which is created through the judgment, we have to focus on it. We don't like it, we don't want it, we don't want to see it, we don't want to believe it, we don't want to think about it. How can it not? That's the sensitivity. How can it not appear in our lives? And it does. And then we point. So that's the greatest paradox or paradoxical irony that we have, is that we contribute to what we have in our lives, and then we point at it as if it's wrong. And then we collude. We have other people join us to help us understand it, to fix it, to do something about it, which is the self-help industry. And again, I'm not saying that it's wrong. I think that they're all steps in part of our spiritual evolution that we as humanity are developing into. And what I try and do is accelerate or help people accelerate that so that they can understand it without judging it. And that's the difficulty. It's because people hear this information and they use it and say, well, I should have known better. I'm smart. You know, I tell all my clients are brilliant. My father used to tell me I'm cursed with the ability to think. It's not such a good thing. The people who are the happiest in our world, I mean, you can probably think of them, you know, people who are more simple-minded, who are not able to process information as quickly or as easily. They're focused on the moment. They live in the moment. And they are simple. So back to our song. You reach a degree of simplicity and get back to what the truth is. I think there's only two truths which guide us in our healing. One is that if what I'm doing or what I'm thinking isn't allowing me to have or create what I want in my life, I can only do one thing. I have to do something else. Albert Einstein said that insanity is repeating the same behavior and expecting different results. Nobody's ever done that. If we know that that's normal, that's part of being human, then we can start doing something about it without judging it. Sanity, anybody know the definition of sanity? Knowing what to do when you don't win the lottery.
Knowing what to do
when you don't win the lottery. What's your plan B? If you don't win the lottery. So you have to have a plan B, thinking that, you know, that's sort of the grass is greener, my life will be better, I will not be victimized any further in my life when this is different. And we always tend to go outside here instead of inside here. To be able to look at why is it that we're doing this to ourselves. And the reality is, what if we're all the same? What if at the end of the day, we all put our heads in the pillow the same way, we have the same kind of quiet, sabotaging kinds of thoughts that we struggle with, pretend aren't there, or look for collusion, or look for sort of answers to try and fix that. And all it does is cause us to understand and believe further that we must have a problem. There must be something wrong. Because we all feel like there is something wrong, there's something missing. What don't I have in my life? I don't have a loving relationship. I don't have enough money. I don't have, right, all the things I don't have. Rather than saying, first step of healing is to be able to be grateful for what you do have. What do you have in your lives? What do I have in my life? Because we forget. I was working with, I worked in a treatment center for a number of years, and one of my clients, I saw her 10 years after, and she had invited me to her 5th anniversary of sobriety. And she was a down and out anorexic, heroin addict who lived in the gutters of Toronto. And when I saw her, I didn't recognize her. She looked completely different. And because she did, she was very different. She had a job, she had a relationship, she had healed to some degree. What struck me, though, was when she was standing up, she gives her little talk. When she was standing up, she started doing this and looking down at her hands and kind of picking at her hands. And I heard the same voice then that I'd heard 10 years before. She started complaining about the girl who had done her nails that morning because there was something wrong with them. And we all think it's all, it's relative, right? It's all relative. And again, you think, well, why is she doing that? Why? But we all do that. We have this compulsion to be self-sabotaging, self-victimizing, think that we're not doing that or not like that we're doing that, not want to be fully accountable or responsible for that, and nothing ever changes. Because when it's brought to our attention, the first thing we do is close off and find something else to point at. Because we can't be accountable. Why would we do that? So here's part of the answer, I believe. If in our delusion we create this belief that we are separate from God, then we're going to be needing to create a connection with God because we believe that we're separate. So we have to work on the connection. What if it's possible that we feel disconnected? We could not do that. Can you disconnect from your children? Doesn't matter where they live. I tell people that you can't even disconnect. When people die in their lives, when they're physically not around anymore, you cannot disconnect from them. Carry them with you. I still talk to my dad. He died 10 years ago. I remember, and I ask little questions in my head. I wonder what my dad would think about that. And I'm sure we all did that. It's comforting. Because it's part of my own thinking. He is part of me. I am part of him. I am part of God. God is part of me. I cannot disconnect from that. And if that's true, then we're all connected. And most of us believe that. So it's not about the connection, it's about the disconnection. Why do we have that disconnection? If we feel disconnected and we think we've done that horrific act, we need to be punished. Right? Because we've done this to, who have we done this to? We've done this to God. We can't step away from that belief, and then we struggle to reconnect. Rather than understanding, we can't do that in the first place. So if we need to be punished, we have to be guilty, right? Can't have guilt without punishment. And then, doesn't that make sense that we set up that self-sabotaging kind of thinking? We construct a life where we're pretending, for the most part, that we're not in pain. But most of us yearn for connection. When we feel in love, we sort of lover's eyes. What happens when you're in love and you're in with that kind of mindset and you're in lover's eyes? You kind of disappear from the planet. Right? You're not thinking, really. All you're thinking about, or you're not even thinking about that. All you're experiencing really is a sense of connection. And it's very powerful, but not loud. It's quiet, it's calm, it's strong, it's telling. It's an experience that we all have constantly. It's always there. It's up to us. We just open the door, and it's there. How do we open the door? We look at the obstacles. We look at the obstacles that are created through our ego mind, which says, I need to be different. Remember, the job of our ego, we all have egos, is to differentiate you from me. How do we do that? Well, we notice first physical appearance. Man, woman, color of hair, size of body. Right? Then we look at clothing. We look at circumstances. We look at anything that we can look at. And we focus, without even thinking about it, on difference. And then we focus and then we judge. Now sometimes, I'll tell you, every couple I ever work with are out of 4 basic character differences or personality differences. They're always different in 2, most often 3, sometimes 4. So that means that they're almost polar opposites, and yet they're choosing each other as mates. Always puzzled me. Most people, when they have friends, their friends are very similar. I know most of my friends are similar to me, but I know my wife is very different. I think that happens to help us with our reminding ourselves that we don't need to be victimized, we don't need to be self-punishing. We are actually connected, and we need to expand ourselves and be open to another way of thinking. So typically our partners will do that for us. Now, when we're working together, it's a perfect complement. If you had a problem that you wanted solved, you would pick 2 people who are very different to help you solve that problem, to give you a different perspective, so you can make a more informed decision. That's what we would do. If you're fixed in what you think is right, though, we don't like to be right. I always ask people, who wants to be right in this room? And I'm always the first one to put it. If everybody wants to be right, and we all feel like we're right, that's a problem. Because how do we connect if we're all right and we're thinking about different things? We could be thinking about the same thing, but in a different way. Shopping is an example I give to people. I don't mean to sort of generalize, but I know that often this is true. Women, when they shop, when they ask, do you want to go shopping? It's usually about going to experience a social event that's about, I say to my wife, inventories. She doesn't shop. So she'll go through and touch. We just walk in the door, and she'll stop at the first thing at the door. Look at that! Look at that! And have a chat about that. So if there's, a few thousand items in the store, we can be there a long time. And she would wonder why, and I'm saying, I'm done. 5 minutes. I don't know if I'm typical as a man, but I'm a hunter. So I know what I want. I know where it is. I know how much it costs. I know what size I need. And I know exactly where it is in the store. So I will go out, drive there, get it, and go home. That's shopping. So can you see how that's something that's very simple. You can see how that can cause a problem. So if you've got these differences that we work with or don't work with, they can often become weapons. So there's no healing because we start doing this, button heads. And then couples will say, right, he said, she said, he's awful, he did this, she said that. It's the you always, you never kind of argument comes up in the relationship more frequently. And they believe that that's what needs to be divorced, is that they need to physically separate. When they're right, they do need to divorce something. But it's not what they think. Wouldn't it be better if they could look at it differently and say it's just because our egos are demanding that we look at these things differently, that we become more closed and more rigid, and that is stopping us. That's making us sick. And people will get sick. They get physically ill. Sometimes people come to me initially, they have physical illnesses. Doctors come and say, it's stress. I have one doctor that I work with quite a bit, and he says 98% of illnesses that he deals with are a result of personal stress. Other than, illness, even you think about viruses, I rarely get sick. It's not that I'm not stressed, but I don't think I'm as stressed. Now we have our DNA in our genetics. I have fairly strong DNA, But if we're healthy in our minds and healthy in our spirits, even though there may be a room full of viruses, you're not going to be as prone to be getting sick. Whereas some people tend to get more colds, more things. And some of that I know is because of the genetic component. But it's an indicator. Everything that we have that we find is stressful, if we emotionally react to something that seems destructive, it's an indicator. Try and remember that it may not be about that. It's an indicator. It says, what is going on here that's causing that? Not that you made it happen, but we forget we have a choice. We're victimizing ourselves again. We can't see ourselves having alternatives. I didn't even look at my notes. How long have I got?
Oh, 2-3 minutes.
2-3 minutes. One of the quotes that I like is, "Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Therein lies the peace of God." So nothing real can be threatened. Real to me, we all learned in Sunday school, God is love. God is love. You know, I learned that when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. Everything I'd learned after that kind of confused me, because I just like that concept. To me, it's a simple concept that says, if God is love and love is God, then if I focus on the love and not on the obstacles, then I will be at peace. And healing just naturally occurs. Jesus, I don't think, took away somebody's leprosy. I think what he did was remind them that they were a child of God. He reminded them that they were a lot more than that. You know, when we have physical or emotional pain, that's what we focus on. We're much more than that, and sometimes we need to be reminded. Nothing unreal exists. Nothing unreal is our egos. Remember, our ego's job is to differentiate, to focus on fear and judgment. But if we're all looking at things differently, if you see a movie, you like one movie, you don't like another one, you know, as opposed to somebody else. You know, you go with your spouse, see a movie, one likes it, one doesn't like it. Is it a good movie? You know, is it a good book? You know, who knows? You make it up. When you're dreaming, you don't know you're dreaming. Right? Your brain functions in a different way. This is kind of like that. The experience that we create through our egos is like that, where we're busy contributing to an experience in our lives, and we forget that we have an alternative. So look at sort of the emotional distress that you may find. The things that, you know, the indicators are, you know, we all have I call it the people we love to hate. Like it or not, spouse, right? Boss, neighbor, children, extended family, and kick the dog. So we don't like that, but it's a focus of our distress. And it's a way that we can excuse or acquiesce our self-made punishment and look at somebody else. So if we're all doing that differently, we're making that happen. So that's what that means, to say that nothing unreal exists. It feels real, but it feels real, it feels true because we focus on it, we make it that way, and forget that we have an alternative. So they are valuable because we need to look at those. Talk to somebody about it. We can't do this on our own. It's like trying to add up a column of numbers and always getting the same answer, but it's the wrong answer. Somebody else comes along and just points at it. Why couldn't I do that? Because we're kind of behind enemy lines when we're thinking about these things on our own. We can't do it on our own. We need another perspective. The miracle of our lives comes from offering ourselves to have a different perspective. To be able to look at something a little differently. Not that what you're thinking or what you're doing is wrong, but you want to be able to expand it, to extend yourself so that you can include more love, make better decisions, and look at things and offer yourself an alternative. If you find yourself getting stuck, remember that it is your ego mind. So the whole purpose is, you think about spiritual healing, really, our spirits really don't need healing. It's our egos that need healing. So it's kind of an oxymoron. We look at it and think, well, it's our spirits that need to be healed. There's nothing wrong with our spirit. That is our connection. That is who we really are. The rest of it needs to be healed because we're busy interpreting something else and making it something that it's not. When you look at the obstacles you talk through it with somebody, you'll find that you're able to find alternatives and do something that's different. And you will start to feel more peaceful. The paradox is that when people start to feel more peaceful, they want to move away from it because that feels unnatural. This feels natural. Being at peace doesn't feel natural. So if you know that again, then you can say, I need to invite this in my life and know that it's going to be odd. But everyone who's experienced it knows what it is. There isn't any question about it. And everyone's experience with that, I find, is the same. And it's not any different. We can't interpret it. We can't even really think about it. It's something that is innate in us. Right? Prattled on enough. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I've got some of my cards and information up there. I certainly invite you to grab that. And thank you for the opportunity.